We're back to the Total Tutor Show, powered by the Insightful Player Series, TotalTutor.net for more information, Twitter, Total Tutor, Neil S. Haley, Facebook, and I am just excited. Again, we've talked about Insightful Player, but I think the major thing about Insightful Player and Chrissy Carew, you go to insightfulplayer.com, is all involving the key thing about resiliency and keep on going and showing that athletes are able to give back, but ultimately just persevere. And this is the first athlete that's not an NFL player, but Shad's story is so fantastic. So I'm really excited to welcome into the program athlete Shad Ireland. Shad, thanks for calling.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I like that word, resiliency. It's something that resonates down to my soul, and it definitely represents my story. I've had a few races where I've had to be pretty resilient in order to finish.
So you're an IronMan Triathlete competitor, and but specifically, we're going to go into your story as a child, and specifically, did you always want to be a professional athlete, Shad?
Oh, man, that was my dream as a kid. I used to run like the wind, and I just, I looked up to athletes like Steve Prefontaine, and I looked at, the guys in the NFL, Tony Dorsett, and, Bud Grant, the coach of the Vikings. I mean, you name it. And, as a kid, I wanted to be an athlete, but unfortunately at age 10, I was diagnosed with kidney failure, and the doctors said that, they talked to my mom, but they had told my mom that life expectancy for somebody given this diagnosis was only 2 to 5 years. And my mom was also a nurse, and she kind of knew the gravity of the situation. And, at 11 years old, I attempted suicide. I had been on dialysis for a year, and I remember laying on my parents' bathroom floor, hugging the toilet after dialysis, throwing up for hours, and passing out on the tile.
Oh, my gosh.
And, my mom would come scoop me up off the floor and put me in bed. And, and there was, a transplant wasn't an option because back in the early 80s, I received multiple blood transfusions, which caused me to be sensitized to every potential donor. So they said to me this was as good as my life was going to get. And by the age of 11, how do you tell a 10-year-old child that you can't dream anymore, your life's over, welcome to hell. And, I was forced to grow up at age 10. I didn't get a childhood. I was forced to deal with adult issues that I can tell you most adults, when they get this diagnosis, they struggle too.
Right.
And so, I can tell you that God's hand has been in my life since my diagnosis, since I was a child, but, and that I'm the man I am today, and I went through the experiences that I went through in order to prepare me to give back to the community that I care about and to make a difference in other people's lives.
Well, Shad, here's the situation, and when you deal with these hard difficulties as a child, a lot of times, and here's one saying we hear all the time, Shad, especially at one of the stations we're on, definitely a faith-filled network we're on. The whole thought process is that, again, God doesn't give us something we can't handle. And we have to understand that. And ultimately, the more we are able to persevere through it, God knew we would be able to do it. And
amen. But I will tell you this, and I don't mean to interrupt, but my buddy was made that comment to me, and I remember making the comment back to him. I just wish that God didn't have as much faith in me as he does. So
that's just understandable. The suffering you went through and the hardship, but ultimately you always had a goal of being a professional athlete. You did not want to say no for an answer. So at 10, when you got that diagnosis, did you kind of just say, you didn't want to crawl up in a ball, did you? Did you give up at first?
I gave up. I didn't see a way out. And I understood the gravity of my situation. I started dialysis. There were 9 other kids that started dialysis around the same time I did at the University of Minnesota in 1983. And over the years, I watched each and every one of those kids die. And I was frantic and angry and upset. And nobody could answer the question I had. How do we fix this? And it drove my just anger. And then I, like I said, I gave up, and it took 6 years for me to stabilize with the disease. By the time I was 16, I was self-destructive, out of control, drugs, alcohol, you name it, I did it.
Oh my
I didn't
God.
care. And my life revolved around being chained to a machine. And my perception was this was as good as my life was going to get. And, I was going to live to the extreme because, tomorrow's never promised. But I was waiting to die, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And I was so consumed with anger. The question is, some people say, why me? Why not? I have this quote, and I wrote it after I made history at Ironman Lake Placid. I wrote, to live with a chronic illness is not a limitation, rather it's an invitation to those of us willing to accept the challenge.
Yes. And Shad, when you were hitting rock bottom, drinking, doing drugs, really because you're suffering through a very hard thing as a 16-year-old, when did your life finally turn around? When did you finally see that, I am not going to give up. I'm going to keep persevering, and I'm going to figure out a way to become have more of a response in the world, be able to participate more in things than the doctors have told me. When did you kind of have that light bulb come on? Because so many people that give up and end up dying in a lot of ways have given up in their lives. They've given up saying, I don't want to fight anymore. But I
felt empty inside. I mean, I was a shell. And, nobody understood. I couldn't talk to anybody. Nobody sat in that chair connected to a machine for 6 hours a day. I can tell you, I struggled for a long time. It took me 15 years before things started to change. But, I received my first kidney transplant when I was 18. And, I was told that, my life's going to change. I'm going to get my life back. And unfortunately, the transplant didn't work. And so I ended up slipping into a coma. I developed what they call associated respiratory distress syndrome. My lungs filled with fluid, and my parents were told to start making funeral arrangements. And I can tell you that I came out of the coma a couple weeks later, and I was discharged from the hospital. I weighed, 75 pounds maybe? And I was sent home to spend, I was given 6 months life expectancy, and I was sent home to die on my mother's couch. And I remember sitting in the shower. I could barely stand. I mean, I had to go through rehab to learn how to walk again. I lost all the muscle development that I had, which wasn't much, disappeared because I was in bed for a month during a coma. And, I remember breaking down and crying and just looking at the shell that I was and being angry. And, and I can tell you it's at my weakest point where I found my strength. I saw the IronMan on TV, and being from Minnesota, we got 2 seasons in Minnesota. That's road construction and winter. And so I'm laying on my mom's couch, and, just to paint a picture for you, it took me an hour to get to the kitchen, to grab a glass of water, and to walk back to the couch. And, I was so stubborn, I didn't want any help. I was going to do it myself anyway. And, and then I'm laying on the couch, and all of a sudden I see this thing called the Ironman on TV, and I fell in love with Hawaii and the palm trees, and I started watching these people do something that they were passionate about. And, passion was something that didn't exist in my life, and nor did hope, nor did goals, nor did anything. And I watched this lady crawl across the finish line. I watched these athletes. I mean, the question I had is just what everybody else asks. How do you do a 2.4-mile swim? How do you do a 112-mile bike ride? And then, oh, by the way, let me get off the bike, and then I'm going to run 26.2 miles for fun. And I told my mom that day. I was so excited. I remember I had tears in my eyes. And I said, Mom, that's going to be me. She's like, you need a nap. and so I remember falling asleep that afternoon on the couch and dreaming of Hawaii. And that day I made a promise to myself that would be me. And I wanted to do the Ironman World Championships. And so the next day, I woke up and I was a different person. I had a different perspective. I kept thinking of Hawaii, and that gave me the strength to fight. And it took me good 13 to 24 months just to gain another 5 pounds back, just to be back to being another dialysis patient. And unfortunately, I forgot the promise that I made to myself. I became angry again because they told me there was no way I was going to live to be 25. It wasn't going to happen. And so, you fall back into depression and you fall back into the, why me and it's not fair. And then I woke up on my 25th birthday and I was really pissed off because I was still here. I'm like, these guys my doctors had 150 years of combined education, yet they couldn't, I'm still here. How could they get this wrong too? And, that is when, I'm sorry I'm being wordy, but that's when my life changed.
Yes.
Because I found myself looking at myself in the mirror, I threw water on my face, and I didn't like who I saw. I didn't recognize, to this day, I'm still just a 10-year-old kid who's scared out of his mind, who doesn't want to die, who, looks at the world with childlike amazement. I feel blessed to do what I do. I mean, to get a chance to pursue your goals and dreams it's undescribable. And so at that time, I remembered I used to be a happy-go-lucky 10-year-old kid before I got sick, and I was looking at a 25-year-old burned-out man that had no goals and no dreams. And my mother always told me, go to college, get an education. You could do something great if you would just get an education and be positive. And so I found myself in a classroom on a Monday morning. The class was called Perspective. And in walks Professor Philip Bell. And he said, today is the day your life changes. Today is the day I teach you to ask questions and seek answers. And I have 2 questions for the entire class. He said, number 1, why are you here? And number 2, what inspires you? The girl jumps out of her chair. She says, I want to feed, I want to create a food shelf. I want to feed the world. The guy next door wants to cure cancer. And it's like a revival. It's going around the room, and I wanted to get out of there. I had this huge chip on my shoulder. I'm angry at the world. I have no self-confidence, no self-esteem. And when I get up to leave, Professor Bell says, Mr. Ireland, yeah, why are you here? I said, it's a required course. And he said, well, what inspires you? And I said, nothing. And he goes, there has to be something that's unacceptable. And I said, okay, well, I want to make $100,000 a year so I can drive a Ferrari. And he just looked at me, and the whole class kind of looked at me. And then Professor Bell smiled. And I think he knew what his class was going to do to my world. And over the course of 15 weeks, he forced me to learn these concepts: reflection, realization, and perception. And he forced me to look inward. And he forced me to ask some tough questions and to go to some dark, deep places that I never wanted to go to and really discover who I was. And at the end of the class, he said to me, what does it mean to be educated? I said, I don't know, I get a Ferrari. And he goes, did you not learn anything in this classroom? He goes, what does it mean to be educated? He said, is education a gift? And if it is, then do you have a personal responsibility to give back to others because you've been given this gift? And at the time, I didn't understand what he was saying to me until 3 weeks later, I was walking out of a dialysis clinic angry at the world. And, as dark and as gray as my world was, it was beautiful outside. I remember there wasn't a cloud in the sky. And I walked outside and I saw a young man in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the neck down. And our eyes met, and he looked at me and smiled. And I said to myself, what does he have to be smiling about? And then the next thought that crossed my mind was, there go I, but for the grace of God. And I realized at that point that young man would have given anything to spend 20 minutes in my shoes, to walk again, to run. And at that moment, I felt grateful. I realized what Professor Bell was trying to teach me, that this is a gift. And at that point, I had this crazy idea that I wanted to beat this disease. And things took off from there.
All right, when we get back, more of the story, an amazing, inspiring story of Shad Ireland, and we're going to learn really how he changed his life, how he became a professional athlete. I mean, thinking about right now, Shad, I see no chance of it. If we were watching a movie right now of your story, which honestly we need to get, that's for sure. You need to have a movie of your story. There's no doubt in my mind. And I have connections in Hollywood and things like that. And we're going to have to. Go ahead. What, Shad? Go ahead.
I was just going to tell you, there is a film project that we're trying to put sponsorship together for. It's called The Definition of Impossible. And there's a film crew that wants to follow me around on my comeback to IronMan. And they've agreed to do it for cost. And so I've also got a third book that I'm writing called The Definition of Impossible that I've started writing. But it's interesting that you say that, because right now we're trying to find sponsors and a way to kind of get this project funded as I now return to racing.
But definitely, but I really would think about a movie and someone play you, for sure, and your life story being on film. That would be great. First the documentary, then the next thing. All right, we'll get back more of Shad Ireland. I tell you, 2 segments won't be enough for him, but I think we're going to be great friends as every insightful player, thanks to Chrissy Carew at InsightfulPlayer.com. You're listening to Total Tutor Show, powered by Insightful Player and the Beach Lifestyle Radio Network, and we'll be back in just a moment. We're back to Total Tutor Show on the Total Education Network, TotalTutor.net for more information. Twitter, Total Tutor, Neil S. Haley, Facebook, the Insightful Player series. And I never thought we'd have an insightful player. I keep telling Chrissy she's got the NFL. I said I have had the dream of interviewing inspiring athletes in all areas of life. And this one here, I think, takes the cake. And I think she told me this and said, you got to get him on the radio. And I'm just blown away of the story, because I already know the backstory, which is unfair. If I would have said, oh, you're going to interview an athlete, and I would have saw, okay, like through Harrow, and it said, oh, Shad Ireland, yeah, he was a triathlete, but he had some difficulties, but you won't tell me? And now I'm hearing your story. Basically, at this point, you're finally saying, I'm going to wake up, and I'm going to reach my goals. However, the medical community's thinking you're going to live a couple years and you're done. You stick a fork in you. There's no way you're going to survive. So once you told people around you, I want to be an Ironman and be a professional athlete, how many people looked at you and said, really, Shad? Are you serious?
They laughed at me.
Right.
I remember being humiliated because, and at the time, I didn't get it. I was angry. And I can look back now and, imagine somebody that's been connecting to a dialysis machine every other day in order to survive. And the dialysis process lasts about 4.5 hours a day. All of your blood gets taken out of your body. It gets run through a machine. It gets cleaned, and it gets given back to you. I weighed 80 pounds soaking wet. I walked into the dialysis clinic and said, guess what? I'm going to do the Ironman World Championships. And now I have no athletic background. I weighed 80 pounds. I've never been in a gym. I've been sick since I was 10 years old. And they're like, you need meds. You have lost your friggin' mind. Do you even know what an Ironman is? And I said, yes, I do. And they're like, so when are you going to do the race? I said, next year. And they were like, yeah, they laughed. And, long story short, I walked into the gym. I remember the first day, I couldn't walk 30 seconds on a treadmill, and I couldn't lift 5-pound dumbbells. And I remember being humiliated because the guys that were in the weight room, because I'm like, I got to go lift weights. If I go in the weight room, I can't lift anything. And all the guys in there look like football players, and they're all lifting 100-pound dumbbells. And I'm looking around, and then I'm like, well, maybe I better go on the treadmill and run. I tried to run, I couldn't, because every person with a renal diagnosis has cardiovascular disease. So I had 20 years of unchecked cardiovascular disease. I couldn't walk 30 seconds on a treadmill without being winded. Your fight or flight emotion kicks in. And I told myself, this is where I draw a line in the sand. This is where I knuckle up. This is where I hold my own. And by Friday, I was going to walk 30 seconds on the treadmill. Now, most people would say 30 seconds on a treadmill, really? But I can tell you, at 20 seconds, I was dying. I felt like I couldn't breathe, but I had to keep going. 21 seconds, 22 seconds, 24 seconds. Seemed like an eternity. I made it to 30 seconds, and I was so proud of myself. And I look back now, and 30 seconds isn't even, it's not even a warm-up. But I did it. And the next couple of weeks, I was able to walk 2 minutes. 6 months later, I was running for the first time in my life since I was 10. A year later, from the day that I started training, a week before I went to Lake Placid, New York, July 20th, 2004, I weighed 142 pounds. I was 6% body fat. The doctors were scratching their heads. They did not know, they didn't recognize the man that was standing in front of them. July 25th, I showed up in Lake Placid, New York. And, I picked Lake Placid because I grew up in Minnesota. I'm a hockey geek. Lake Placid is where, the U.S. beat the Russians, and, there's history there. So I thought, that'd be really cool to see that place. So I went to Lake Placid. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I figured, I want to go to the World Championships, so I have to qualify. How hard could that be? And I can tell you ignorance is bliss. So I showed up Lake Placid, and I woke up at 3 a.m. I started eating oatmeal and, following my nutrition regimen. And by 6:30, we were in the water. And I was surrounded by 2,500 athletes. And I wanted to win, so I put myself in the front. That's the wrong place to be as a first-time Ironman who was an okay swimmer. The guy next to me screaming, he's like, "Oh, I love Ironman." He's like, "How many of these have you done?" I'm like, "It's my first one." He's like, "Are you a good swimmer?" "Nope, not really." He said, "Well, you need to be in the back or you're going to get hurt." So as I started to turn around to get in the back, the cannon went off, and literally everybody swam over me. So, and that's where it began. And I can tell you that while you're in the water, you have no concept of time. And the whole time there's a little voice screaming in my head, "You can't do it. You're not even going to finish the swim." Because that's what everybody told me. All the doctors, all the nurses, everybody was, "You can't do this. You have to stop this insanity." And I got out of the water the first time, and I looked at the clock. It was 37 minutes. I swam 1.2 miles in 37 minutes. I couldn't believe it. I was excited. I ran back in the water for the second lap, and got out of the water, and with transition, I finished the swim respectably, an hour, 20 minutes, and 12 seconds with transition. Your top guys in the world are going to knock it out in 48 minutes. But you know what? I swam with the best, and I held my own. And then I got on the bike, and I missed the memo. There are mountains in Lake Placid. So the bike became very painful. And I finished the bike in 8 hours, and that's where it got interesting. I couldn't feel my legs when I got off the bike. I didn't know how I was going to run. I ran the first mile, and I kid you not, triathletes are very, very supportive of each other. And, I was struggling a bit, and I felt this swat on my rear end, and I heard this lady say, "Hang in there, I'll see you to the finish line." And I looked down at her calf as she ran by me, and I think it said 72. She was 72 years old, and she ran by me like lightning.
Oh my.
And I'm just like, "Oh, you got to be kidding me." And at that point, I knew I had 25.2 miles to walk because I had nothing left in the tank.
Oh, wow. And how did you do it?
A lot of prayer, a lot of perseverance, a lot of dedication. I will tell you this. As I journeyed from the dialysis chair to the finish line at Lake Placid, this was about a promise that I made to myself. And after making history, I went back and, I got over 3,000 emails from around the world, from patients and people wanting to know how I was going to do this, wishing me well, telling me good luck. And I realized that this was never about me. This was about the impact that I can make in other people's lives. I'm just a 10-year-old kid that dreamed of being an athlete who got a shot. And I took it. And despite the medical community saying you can't do it, I did it. I walked and I ran and I walked and I ran, and I got a mile away from the finish line and I was done. It's 11 o'clock at night. I got nothing left. I went to sit down. The gentleman comes running out of the car. He's like, "Oh, you're Shad Ireland, right? The guy with no kidneys. I've been following you all day." And he grabbed my arm. And I looked at him because I didn't know this guy. And he's like, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm about to sit down. It's been a long day." And I was bleeding through my shoes. My shoes started off as white. They were red. And the guy said to me, he goes, "If you sit down, you'll never get back up." And I just looked at him, and he said, "You only have 17 hours to finish the race." He's like, "You got to run." And I'm like, "Well, you know what? Maybe I can't finish this. I've gave it my best." And he looked at me and he said, "At some point in our lives, we're going to be faced with the ultimate challenge." He said, "You have to ask yourself, did I give everything that I had when that moment came?" And he said, "And if you answer yes, you better think deeper." And I just looked at this guy, and he goes, "I'll tell you what, I'm going to run you to the finish line." Okay. So he started to run. My run represented a penguin waddle. And, before I know it, I was 6 blocks into a mile. And before you know it, I was 6 blocks away from the finish line. And I remember the guy kind of faded into the crowd, and, I hit the Olympic Oval, and the next thing you know, it's crowds going crazy, beach balls, music, and everything went into slow motion. I crossed the finish line, and they said, "Shad Ireland, you are an Ironman," which is why every triathlete does Ironman. We race for that 1 second when we hit the finish line to hear our name announced. It's an iconic moment. And I knew at that moment I just did what the world said I couldn't do. And at that point, man, I could do anything. And I went on to continue to race. I did over 20 triathlons. I rode my bike across the United States when they told me I couldn't.
Oh, wow.
You know, that's an interesting story. I'll just tell you this quickly. There was an African-American gentleman that I met in Louisiana, and as I grew in my athletic career, I grew in my advocacy career. You know, I believed in philanthropic endeavors and giving back, and so I got a chance to work with several different companies and to engage patients who had this disease and try to motivate them and engage them and educate people, the community, before they got diagnosed, trying to make those changes and those impacts. And so there was an African-American gentleman that I met in Louisiana, and he said to me, he goes, I can't do this anymore. And he had just started dialysis. And he said, you know, I've got 3 daughters. I pushed a broom my entire life so that they wouldn't have to. What am I going to do? I can't work. And I looked at him and I said, well, what if I could give you a formula that could change your life? And he's like, don't lie to me because I can't handle somebody lying to me. And he started crying. And, you know, I started to, at that point, I didn't understand the impact that this disease had in underserved communities and communities of color. So I left that clinic that night and got on the plane and was really frustrated because I was really moved by this guy. And I didn't know what to say to him. What could I do? I'm just a kid from Minnesota. And then I started to do some research, and African Americans and people of color are 4 times more likely to develop a renal diagnosis and 9 times less likely to catch the disease at a point where something can be done. You know, high blood pressure and diabetes are rampant in those communities, and I think we can do a better job. And so, again, I asked the question, what could I do? I'm an athlete. I like to ride my bike. I like to swim. I like to run. Well, I wasn't going to run across the country, so I decided to get on my bike and ride. And I rode through underserved communities all the way from California to Washington, D.C.
Oh, wow.
And they said, there's no way you can do it. They said, you have to dialyze every other day. I said, I'll ride from dialysis clinic to dialysis clinic.
My
and I did.
gosh.
I rode 4,639 miles in 3 months.
Wow. So, Shad,
Yeah, cool.
Amazing. Like I said, definitely 2 segments is not enough time. So, Shad, right now, so basically you're training for 2014's Ironman. You've really become a better athlete since 2004, and you really have a goal of winning the Ironman. So,
hey, let me preface this by saying, not winning the whole thing. I would love to do that, but I want to qualify for the World Championship, so yeah. I'm going to have to probably get pretty close to winning my age group. Yes.
So winning your age group, sorry, not the situation, but through this notoriety, through what you've been able to do, through the philanthropic help you've been able to do, and the true story of this. Ultimately, in a couple of days, you have a big event too, don't you?
Yeah, the New York City Marathon, which is another dream. I mean, you know, and I tell you, it's been a tough year. I mean, they almost amputated my foot last year because I had vascular necrosis, and the surgeon didn't think he could save my foot. And he told me, you know, I had dreamed of coming back to racing because I made a promise to myself. I want to race the World Championships. That's my dream. And he's like, your running career is over. He said, I might have to take your foot off. And I told him, I said, no, I'm partial to my foot. And so, you know, God's grace, you know, I was healed and a lot faster than the surgeon thought I was. And, you know, and I've been, you know, slowly getting back into running. And, you know, but to do the New York City, ING New York City Marathon is a huge opportunity. It's an iconic race. There's going to be over 50,000 people in New York next Sunday. And I get to be one of those people. You know, I mean, how cool is that?
Well, best of luck to you. So where can our listeners find information on you, Shad, purchase your books, and learn more about you?
Sure. My athlete website is www.ironshad.com. I will tell you I do have a foundation, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit. It's called the Shad Ireland Foundation, and the web address is shadirelandfoundation.org. And I will tell you this, my goal is to build an endowment for my foundation because I believe 100% of the money raised should be given away. And so if we can build an endowment, you know, a $5 donation can turn into a $50,000 donation over a lifetime. And so through this project, this Inspired to Finish project, we're launching a causes page in a couple of days where people can go and make a donation. They're also able to kind of upload. What's really cool about this is I've challenged people to tell me what they're inspired to finish. So they get to upload a 60-second video telling us what they're inspired to finish. And, you know, the finish lines and the goals are personal, but the journey can be shared by all.
All right, well, fantastic. It was really enjoyed talking to you, Shad. Best of luck in the New York City Marathon. And again, we'll have to hear about your updates after the Ironman competition in June. So thanks for calling and best of luck to you.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. And if I could just say one more thing, kidney disease is growing rampantly across the United States, and there is a test that people can get done. It's called a GFR. So if obesity, high blood pressure, and diabetes are the leading causes, and if they or one of their loved ones happen to have one of those leading causes, they can see a doctor and just ask to get their GFR checked, because if they can catch it early enough, they can do things to stave off the progression of the disease.
Well, you're an inspiration, Shad. You're getting the message out all over the world, and I best of luck. I'm rooting for you at the New York City Marathon and also at the Ironman. So thanks for calling, Shad.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too. You're listening to the Total Tutor Show on the Total Education Network, powered by the Insightful Player Series, and we'll be back in just a moment.